organ may not yet be discovered. What if you have a vestigial retrogressive organ as they're named, but you don't know of a function for it, you don't know for use of it and so forth? What does that really prove? What it really proves is we've just not been smart enough to figure it out yet. Is that correct? Right? So it doesn't mean it doesn't have a function. It just simply means we haven't been smart enough to figure out what it is. Now, I have a different opinion. As a creationist, I figure if there's a structure or an organ there, God put it there and it has a reason. Whether I've been smart enough to figure it out or not is irrelevant. I think it had one, still does. And the function of an organ may be taken up by another organ when it is removed. For example, aren't you glad you have 2 kidneys? Or how about the spleen? You can remove the spleen, but then the liver kind of picks up the function and so forth. So God has built in redundancy here, because think about it, if you lost just one of these things, well, you would die, but God has built in these, systems that they can overlap. And the list of useful structures has decreased to 0 as our knowledge has increased. Today, we know of at least one or more valuable functions for every structure or organ listed by Dr. Wiedersheim in his book. So after 100 years of research, the number's down to 0. What about vestigial structures in other creatures? I mean, again, evolutionists are always pointing at these things. For example, they talk about the, quote, hip bones, unquote, in whales, or they'll talk about the spurs in snakes. They will say these hip bones are the leftover pelvis from a cow. They'll say the spurs are just leftover legs from when snakes had legs. But let's take a look at the truth. Now, this is a textbook showing the supposed evolution of snakes, whales, and horses. In the textbook right here it says, whales and snakes have vestigial hip bones and leg bones. Horses once had 4 functional toes. Now they walk on just 1 toe. The others are no longer functional. Now, let me stop for just a minute and ask a question. If horses started out with 4 toes, they now have 1 toe. Please tell me, is that the adding of information or the subtracting of previously existing information? Well, it would be the subtraction of previously existing information, is that correct? Now, I don't think that's how horses came into existence, but that wouldn't be getting bigger, better, faster, smarter. That would be getting smaller, slower, and dumber. And what about snakes? This is another textbook right here on biology. And here it's showing an illustration of the 2 spurs and pythons and so forth. And the textbook says that these are rudimentary hind legs. Well, they're not rudimentary hind legs. Snakes never had legs to start with. And evolutionists will say these are just the deteriorated hind legs. Now, here's a close-up photograph of a boa constrictor, python skin here, with these spurs. Now, evolutionists say that these are just the decay of a previous structure. But actually, they're absolutely essential to various kinds of snakes. You see, the male uses these spurs to manipulate the female for copulation. Without them, the snakes can't mate. Now, I think you'll agree with me, if you're a snake, that's really important. So they do have a known function, but they're not the rudiments of something else. This isn't some deteriorated structure. It's a very wise design. And here, now, we have a dictionary on science that says again about the word vestigial. It says whales, for example, have small bones located in the muscles of their body walls that are vestigial bones of hips and hind limbs. Well, I disagree with that statement, but this is what this science dictionary said in 2005. Now, there are groups of people who will still tell you that whales evolved from cows. Now, I would like all of you to do an interesting little experiment. In your head, I would like you to just fast as you can, in your mind, see a creature that's half cow, half whale. Got it? Now, according to evolutionists, that would be a transitional form. Somehow, no, there's a mixture between a cow becoming a whale, and there's a transitional form of the two. Now, the fact of the matter is, we've never found any such creature. This is believed in by faith. And here are some biology textbooks just to prove it. This is from 2006. here is this whale, and you see these hip bones in the back end here. They say, well, these are the vestigial hip bones and so forth, when the whale was a cow. And they say that's just the pelvis that is deteriorating away. This is actually a university-level textbook from 2005. Again, we see a similar drawing of a whale with these hip bones in the back, as they call them. And they say, again, that this is just a deterioration. Or here's another one. This is from 1989, but again, we have a whale with these pelvic and femur bones back here. And it says this: many organisms retain traces of their evolutionary history. So many organisms retain traces of their evolutionary history. For example, the whale retains pelvic and leg bones as useless vestiges. Another one, 1998. We see the same thing here. The textbook says whales have a vestigial pelvis and leg bones that serve no purpose. These structures are evidence of the whale's evolution from four-legged land-dwelling animals. Here's another one. Notice what it says here. Modern whales have hind limbs which have been reduced to only a few tiny internal hind limb bones that have no function. Okay? Now we're getting to the vestigial, and I love this one. This is a textbook for children, and it says here, just imagine whales walking around. It's true. Well, no, it's not true. It's a lie. You have to imagine this. There's no science to support this. That's faith. Now here at the Los Angeles, California Museum of Natural History, we see an actual whale skeleton, and you can actually see here are the actual bones that they're talking about. That's what they really do look like. But think with me for a moment. Here in this textbook page, it says such structures which are considered to be evidence of an organism's evolutionary past are called vestigial structures. But the fact of the matter is that actually there are no such things as vestigial organs. Even if there were, that would be the opposite of evolution. And let's talk about whales for just a second. Those bones in the back end of a whale are not the deteriorated, disintegrating hip and pelvis bones of a cow or something like that. Those bones are actually useful to the whale in two ways. Number one, the whale uses those bones, again, in copulation. Without those bones, a whale can't mate. So again, if you're a whale, I think that's a really important feature. But there's something else too. Those bones are actually a pivot point which a mechanical engineer would admire. Because you see, whales are mammals and their tail goes up and down like so. And, well, if you don't have those bones right there, then the muscles that would require the whale's tail to go up and down would have to extend from one end of the animal to the other. The muscles would become so large, a whale couldn't exist. But because of these bones being a pivot point, you have muscles going from the front to the bones, and then another muscle goes from the bone to the tip of the tail. And because of this, the muscles can be much smaller and they can fit inside the whale. So these are a cleverly designed engineering pivot point to attach the muscles that go to both ends of the body, which allow a whale to actually live. And so it's a very good design feature. And so the whale needs them for two reasons. Now let's talk about the recapitulation theory of embryonic development, or as Ernst Haeckel called it, the biogenetic law. Now Ernst Haeckel was a direct disciple of Charles Darwin.